Welcome to Higher Intelligence, smart takes on AI for the next generation campus. I'm Bonilla, EdTech executive, data scientist, and educator. Today's topic is about the gap between what AI agents are supposed to do and what they actually do in universities. The demos are impressive, right? The implementations are super hard. And the reason, almost every time, is the same. The context or the lack thereof. Agents are not failing or not thriving because the models are bad. They're failing because the data they need to do their job, it's scattered across 1,000 disconnected places, updated in nightly batches, processed their core workflows, or locked behind API walls that vendors are designing without the intention to share them. Agents are showing up, AI is showing up to do the work empty-handed. So to do this conversation today, I needed to bring the best of the best. Today, my guest is a person who works on this problem every single day. One of my favorite persons in Element 451. And we're doing this to the focus on 4 stories. How infrastructure, the challenge of infrastructure, how AI and agentic AI in that area, it's needed, but there's some incomplete parts. Let me introduce Kelly Sinacola. She's the VP of Integrations and Partnerships at Element 451. A title that sounds technical, but here's what you need to know about Kelly. Kelly is the person responsible for making sure that when an institution buys AI, they know how to deploy it, and more importantly, creating that roadmap of watch outs, what ifs, and how to make these technologies successful. Kelly, welcome to my mic. How are you?
Thanks, JC. You're also one of my favorite people on the Element 451.
No, you're my favorite. Say that. You're my favorite.
No,
I'm your favorite.
we'll just argue about that back and forth. No, you're my favorite. But yeah, really happy to be here. And you're right. It's something that I get to talk about every day. So core to the fun work that I get to do.
Kelly and I travel together, work together. So we do have a banter and ways of working. So hopefully you'll see that throughout today's conversation. But more importantly, one of the important things that I find in this conversation, Kelly, is that you represent a woman leader of 2 worlds. You've done that and you crushed it a la 1990s. What does that mean? Cloud computing and prem and things like that. And that legacy system that, if you will, IT technical persona remains on campus. But you also have converted yourself to these new technologies that it's AI forward, agentic forward, and let me just ask you this question. Is there a clash in the 2 personalities? There, on campus, you see the 1990s persona, the emerging 2026 persona, more agentic forward. Are these 2 different people? Are there one and the same? Oh, it's just the same terminology, just, different technical lingo. Where are you at in the clash of the 2 worlds, if any?
Well, and it certainly helps with my personality disorders, right, JC?
Hey, this is not a counseling session, Kelly. This is not a counseling session, okay?
Not my therapist. Okay, not my therapist today. Got it. No, I think we're constantly tackling the same problem. So I had a conversation just last night about how the AI world is echoing what we saw when internet and cloud computing first came out, right? Where we have the same problems. They ultimately are all people problems coming from a data context problem. So being able to first define the problem, apply a solution. We have different solutions now, but we still have the problem of defining what that actual problem is so that we can prescribe the right solution. And I think that's what I saw when I was on campus. It's what I saw in my consulting. It's what I see now here at Element 451, or just when talking about different AI solutions as well.
That's interesting. I think what I'm hearing you say is the methods, the ways to solve the problem are different, but the art of problem solving remains the same, right? And it's just basically throwing technology, if you will, in a very highly generalized way, right? We throw technology at these problems, and it just the technology maybe has advanced. Is that a fair representation, or did I put words on your mouth?
No, absolutely a fair representation. It's it's just different ways of solving that same puzzle.
Interesting. All right, let's jump into our first story. And what we're going to be doing today is we're reviewing several stories, and I'd love to get your take on this very important concept that for the reality, the promise of AI, specifically agents to deliver, they are content rich and context is probably the problem to solve. So let's start with some stats. AI agents can only access 20% of the enterprise data. That means structure data that today probably lives in your ERPs or CRMs. This is not higher education data, Kelly. The other 80%, communications, notes, behavioral signals, engagement history, it's invisible to the agents. 20% of relevance, or basically the inputs that agents need to do their job, it's only omnipresent. I bet that number is different at universities, and I'd like to have that thinking from you. So what does that mean? Think about what a student success agent needs to do their job. They need to go to your SIS. Think about what financial aid needs to do the job. Maybe you need to go to ERP or your, bursar office technology. Think what engagement looks like for students, emails, events attended, completed forms. That's five more systems. Think about an agent needs to understand if you go to class, if you attended your advisement session, that may be your LMS or your advisement tool. All these systems exist in most campuses, but they are disconnected. The framing that I want to give here is that within this 80-20 split, we see agents living in that 20% and doing okay. But it is in that remaining 80% of advisement notes, email threads, policy, behavioral data, engagement signals, unstructured data, that the true promise of agents come in, right? This data comes from some of the reports that Information Week did in survey data, and basically instrumenting and kind of getting census from CTOs and CIOs, and it represents the kind of enterprise landscape of corporate America, if you will. So let's start with a question. You talk to hundreds of CTOs and CIOs of universities. Number one, does this number surprise you? And number two, is it different? It's an 80-20 split in higher education.
I feel like it's worse in higher education, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The thing that stood out to me the most in this article when they were defining that 20-80 split was they defined that 20%, the ERP, the SIS, the LMS, as well-structured data. That is really undercutting the history of SISs on campus. So at my alma mater, they implemented the SIS there in 1982. It was a long time ago. These SIS platforms have continued to change and shift and grow and develop over time. You've received monthly patch updates. The data is shifting. The context is shifting. Where you store data is shifting. And many of these schools, if we've known, higher education has been underfunded for decades. It's not a new problem. So to be able to keep up with all of these changes in those structured data elements, it takes people and it takes work and it takes an understanding of the context that you're trying to derive. So in my work with colleges and universities, you have a field that's as simple as a start term. And that can be redefined in so many different ways across different colleges and universities. So structured, sure, but are those definitions well defined so that we can garner the context that we need from each of those elements? You
just said two statements that makes the situation more bleak, right? So it is not 2080 in higher education, higher, and throw your number, but it's more than 20. But within that remnant that is supposed to be structure, 20 or 80 or 40, whatever, you're saying data ain't clean. That the structure, if to use the construct, so structure doesn't mean data integrity, and there's messes there. But Kelly, some of us preach that this is the beautiful thing about agents, that structured data is actually harder for them to read. It is these knowledge bases and these kind of knowledge databases that are unstructured data, PDFs. Throw your website at your agent. Throw your catalog and your 7,000 PDF that talks about the student experience. So what do you say about that? I mean, does that hold, or, where do you see this aspect of the agentic architecture that thrives on unstructured data, aka PDFs, websites, documents?
Mm-hmm. And that's the point where I see that we have hope in higher ed, right? So where we have the bleakness of the 20%, we have more hope in the 80%, because that unstructured data is more novel, more new in higher ed. So JC and I did a presentation last month at our AI summit, and we held up our black and white composition notebooks. And that's typically where this unstructured data has lived. with the advent of CRMs in higher education, which is a more novel concept. I know I started doing CRM implementations in higher ed in 2011, so a lot different than that 1982 start date for SISs. It's newer. So the data is cleaner, but it also doesn't have to be. You can have these unstructured notes. This is where AI thrives. Give it that context. And so we're stronger in that 80%, but less strong in that 20%.
So if your point is it's more than 20% of the data that is AI ready, and watch out, within that there's data integrity issues. Talk to me about the remaining 80% or whatever that number is, but basically what agents don't have access to. Where do you see higher education having the most blind spots? I'm sorry. Like, think about, where do you see the most inconsistency? In other words, don't go there first, because that's going to be the hardest one to get data from, so that the agents can do their magic.
Well, and I think it's important, instead of looking at it as easy or hard to get, it's important to understand where your silos are. So unfortunately,
campuses,
higher ed,
Kelly, everywhere.
every campus has all the silos. That's where we start, right?
It's sad that we're joking about it, but for our listeners, you know what we mean, right? So traditionally, we just are not good in terms of de-siloing, and our data governance represents that type of siloing. Sorry to interrupt you, Kelly, but just
No, that's perfect, and that's where the problem introduces itself. So we have made these policies that have been sort of in the best interest of the student, but they are not in the best interest of getting us good data. So making sure we have all of these disparate systems. So for private notes, for example, we'll have 3 separate systems to keep track of those private notes instead of being able to have them all in a single system. So understanding those silos for that 80% of the data, and knowing, is it an integration problem that we have to solve? Is it a consolidation problem that we have to solve? But making sure we're bringing all of those data pieces in line together, and knowing where our silos are. So we can't just turn a blind eye to a problem that we know is happening. And I think that's where these AI projects also fall down. We go into it all very hopeful. AI is going to solve everything. And we start boiling the ocean instead of just understanding where our silos are, where our communication breakdowns happen just between people. And then how are we going to solve that with technology?
I'm not sure if this is a fair question. Feel free to say, I don't know. But if I were to push you to say, tell me which category is the hardest one. If you build integrations, way too many, hundreds, right, across higher education systems, and you understand the categories. So there's a SIS category, there's LMS categories, and there's like these point solutions and advisement, financial aid. So it's kind of SISs, LMSs, CRMs, and what I would call point solutions. You may disagree and say, actually, there's other categories. But where do you see the biggest blocker today in the category space? Is it harder to do the SIS to agents? Is it harder to do the LMS to agents? Is it harder to do the CRM to agents? Or, I don't know, the infrastructure management for, paying, what's it called? The one that a lot of schools used to pay in cafeterias, the one card?
Oh, like the card swipe systems?
Yeah, the card swipe. Are those easier or harder? I'm sorry, I'm asking where do you see that is the hardest one?
Yeah, and I think we can go sort of backwards in age. I think that the LMS data a lot is more commonly better structured. So that's easier to connect to. Now, some schools will come back at me and say, well, no, because we have a faculty bargaining unit or whatever. It doesn't matter. At least the data structure is in a more modern format. So it's meant to be able to connect there and be able to make those connections happen. Where if we're talking about something like, I'll take a subset of SIS data, financial aid, when we're looking at that first story, that first article that we went through, they were talking about how a lot of the context is lost with negotiations. Well, we don't have that in higher ed. We have the engagement, the counseling conversations that are happening with a student where we're building that context, and that's great. Unstructured AI thrives as long as it's recorded in a way that we can get to it. But what we do have is financial aid and all of these very complicated scholarship algorithms, changing requirements from the federal government on how we can calculate these pieces. So that's, I think, the trickiest area to try and step into. So easy to say, in a chatbot way, right? Not in an agentic way to say, well, how do I fill out a scholarship application? Here you go. Here's the answer. A lot more difficult to explain all of the nuances in something that's as complicated as as financial aid, and where too opinions can sometimes matter more than algorithms.
It's a really good point. I think I'm hearing two things as we move away from this story. That as we start looking at the challenges, the legacy, the longevity of these data objects could not play our way, so they're harder to integrate. So in more modern data technologies or data objects could be AI more friendly type of thing. But your other point is super important, everybody. The gap between technology advancement, what AI can do, relative to data governance, it's gigantic. There's no articulation right now that speaks of FERPA and AI. It's being shaped as we speak. So what about FAFSA? What about compliance? And we start thinking about AI and systems and point solutions that will have strong dependencies on reporting or compliance. We know that those could be other blockers, right? And the technology is so far ahead that we don't even know PII or FERPA type of aspects. Anyway, so the context gap in higher education is not a problem in isolation. The second story here is where I kind of want to move us along is that through the lens of enterprises, there's another wall that they're hitting. Not only the data access, we just saw the 80-20 split, but there's this, what is happening is a compounding effect on context-starved agents that now are working through multi-agent approaches. The premise here, as you hear to this story, is that when we speak about agentic AI, you should not have one agent. You should have 152,000 agents, and that's the promise. So agent orchestration is the next frontier. Salesforce recently gave us a report of the enterprise of connectivity. As you know, Salesforce has been driving this agent force point of view, and they're trying to help us understand how many average agents are being deployed per team, per enterprise. So the average enterprise now has 12 deployed agents. This number, and by the way, that means that is 12 agents, and they will do it a la accounting, a la go-to-market, a la financial forecasting. So the agents are able to translate functional deployment. So the number is projected to grow to 67 by 2027. So by next year, the average enterprise will have 67 agents doing this. Now, buried in the same report, it says that 50% of those agents are operating in complete isolation. So that's the first story. The data, the context is not there. On top of that, the coordination and the unified data layers combined just make this problem even larger. So what does that look in practice? You have redundant automation triggering on the same student at the same time, and the agents don't even know to each other. They don't talk to each other. So think about contradictory decisions. A student could potentially experience that an agent specialized in enrollment data, I don't know, SIS or CRM, doesn't talk to the financial aid agent, and then conflicted data comes in. 50% of the enterprise agents, again, operate in complete isolation. No shared context, no coordination. More agents do things, but more agents are not coordinating or talking to each other. So Kelly, you just spoke about silos. Same type of question. So can I give me the real picture here? So if 2080 is the stat on enterprises, and now we see 12 agents per average, the combined issue is basically that 50% of the agents are operating in isolation. Translate that for higher education. Same? It's just worse? Like, where does your gut go here when you hear the compounding effect of this problem?
Yeah, and I think it is compounded in higher ed because everyone is now rushing to AI. So when we have every single product that we have on campus running out to make their own AI layer, we run into this exact problem that was described in the Salesforce article. So all of these agents operating in their own silo. So we're compounding the problem now where we've already have separate products that aren't connected, aren't talking, the data is not being shared. And now we have an agentic layer on top of it that's compounding that problem and not talking to those other agents, which is also a very human problem that we see on campuses anyway. If financial aid isn't talking to admissions, then that student is getting a different experience. It's the same as if it's a human problem or an AI problem as well. And we see that with lack of access to data as the human problem too. So if I am an admissions professional working and trying to consult with a student on what their aid package may be and don't have access to financial aid data. That's why we saw one-stop shops become such an in vogue item in the early aughts, right? You saw that, right, JC? Where everybody suddenly went into a one-stop model.
One of my claims to fame is the first one-stop shop for our graduate school at NYU. And it was, to your point, it was 90% human, 10% technology. We solved the problems of the human workflow, the experience, but behind doors, and this is where I'm going to quote our friend Brian from WaveTech, spreadsheets, duct tape, and prayers, literally.
Exactly. And so then we layer on AI and expect it to fix it when we know that we already had this problem, right? So I do think that it's more of a impact in higher ed in the campuses that haven't already solved the problem of working together outside of these silos.
So the fix is centralization, right? And with the one-stop shop did that as it relates to experience, the process, the workflow, right? The first line of defense, which you can say is customer service. Salesforce in the same report speaks about its intelligent context layer, which is kind of real-time data retrieval layers that look at different business units, structure and structured data, and kind of creates a layer that is agent-friendly so that the isolation issue is removed. Also, we know current protocols within AI, MCP, allows data connectors to proliferate, so it's easier for me to connect point solutions with an AI system because I have an MCP layer that pushes my data and the agent has access to it, or the AI has access to it. Here comes the higher education POV here. Oh, of course. I've been talking about that since 1980. It's called the Unified Data Layer, the Student Unified Data Layer. That is so hard to do, Kelly. So I don't know, take me back to memory lane, but are we going to be able to solve this? Is this really what, are we going to be able to put a unified student journey that allows us to do these type of things? The skeptic of me, I just been in those committees and we didn't get to do it 20 years ago. So why would it work now?
And that's exactly where I get stuck on this, JC. We weren't able to do it when we were in a less complicated environment, right? We were operating in spreadsheets and prayers in most cases, trying to get all of this data together. And so now our environment has become even more complicated with even more products, even more policies, even more regulations. And now is the time that we think we're going to do it. I've gone through these data governance discussions with so many schools, and ultimately, as we know, it's usually not a technology problem. It's a people problem. It's a culture problem. It's a change management problem. And so will we get there today? I thought it was very optimistic in that Salesforce article too, when they were commenting on, it's going to come into being in 2027. Well, why 2027 then? I am made more hopeful by a lot of the work that's going on in the SIS companies. So the SIS companies are trying to drive more data governance in the products themselves, which is trying to remove that people layer, but ultimately it's going to be about the use of that data and making sure that there's not a composition notebook off to the side that's storing additional context that we need that we don't have access to.
Who has the responsibility to make this happen? So if I'm a vendor, think about us as Element 451. We're a vendor to many, more than 400 schools, and we're working with a lot of partners. That's also something that you oversee for the company, our partnership network. So I have a question of who has the responsibility nowadays to deploy this unified student layer that will reduce the risk of isolated agents. So let me elaborate on this idea. In the 80s and 90s, it was on the school, right? Because you have your own spreadsheets and all know what you had, and then you put it your database or your SIS and things like that. But these systems were just massive, and they were not designed to talk to each other. I argue now that these agentic technologies are designed to talk to each other because they're context hungry. MCP protocols and many other things like that are so easy. Like the world of data connectors has proliferated immensely in the past 10 years. So all that culture is on us. So is it fair for me to say I'm now the president of the Bonilla University of Awesomeness?
Oh, I will attend. That sounds
You have a PhD from there, Kelly. So it's on my vendor. You have to basically do the work for me, so I don't have to worry about bringing my cabinet and creating the unified data layers and reducing silos. Break them from me. How? By making sure that your tools are natively connected to my tools. So, AKA the API integrations or the 17,000 ways in how I can get that data. Is that a fair statement? Is that too optimistic? Like, how does this land to you?
I think the ultimate accountability is on partnership. So, yes, there is an obligation. Well, there's an obligation on the vendor side, there's an obligation on the school side, there's an obligation on any consultants that they choose to bring into the mix as well. So, if I'm the vendor, then I have to make sure I'm providing a tool that can give the data construct so that I can use it effectively and be able to connect natively into a bunch of different applications. And that's ultimately in the 80s, 90s, early aughts where those vendors fell down. They're like trying to be everything to everybody. Go ahead, create a bunch of custom fields, go nuts, donuts, build your own everything. Then what came in was, oh, we have to create an API layer so that we can connect natively to other applications. When that came into play, it was, oh, our data is borked, right? There's bad data everywhere because we've allowed this data to just live within our systems. And that's where data scanning and all those type of pieces came into play. Typically that's where I, in my consultant hat, my consultant layer would come in and start to clean up that data, but the data ownership is on the institution. So the vendor's responsible for making sure their tools can have some definition, some governance, some control of the data that's in those systems. But ultimately, that data, whether I put in for my address a real address or not, that's on the institution. So the vendor has to give me the tools to make sure that I can test and grade how good that data is and to connect to those other systems. But that data ownership and enforcement of making sure the staff is using those tools correctly, that's on the institution.
What would you say, kind of rough math, is the percentage of higher ed institutions, universities and colleges, that have an enabled API team that could do on their own? So, most schools have an IT department, I would say 100%. Within those, how many can do API work themselves?
I would say 30%. And that's an issue with maturity, right? When I was on campus, as these vendors changed all of their technology, it was really hard working in a small IT shop, staying up to date, right? So at first I needed to know how to basically code in COBOL, and that's similar to what UniQuery and Unibasic was. And then they moved into more of a Java-like language. So then, okay, now I have to retrain all of my programmers to learn in that context. And then they started adding on these API layers, oftentimes with sort of unreadable API frameworks to be able to plug into. So that element of retraining goes into, again, that underfunding of higher ed that we talked about earlier in story 1, too.
Can you talk a little bit more about the difference for success in AI agent frameworks when if you're part of that 30% that will connect to these agents, or will connect your systems via API, so real time, or you have your vendor doing it for you, versus the ones that connect with flat files? Because that's the other thing. Like, oh, sure, I'm going to connect, but here's my flat file. And I argue that majority of schools right now have some type of flat file practice. And as you know, it's basically you schedule an export and it happens with certain type of frequency, and the export goes to a receiving system, and there's a common exchange based on a template. The data looks the same, so the receiving system knows what to do with that. So God forbid you change the export, because the systems, another fragility will unpack. But talk to me about, from your POV, I'm going to solve all these problems of APIs with flat files. Pros and cons.
Yes. Oh, flat files. I always describe it when I'm talking with our
We've only
partners.
done 7,000 of them last year.
1 million flat files. And it's unfortunately the unsexy way we've had to get work done in higher ed. So the timing issues are big there, because a student could go and pay a balance and now you're still chasing them for bad debt through an agent. So the timing of that context shifts when you go from an API to a flat file. And is it always structured the same? Yes. Can you code around a bunch of different things to make sure it's consistent? Yes, absolutely. But that timing is really the issue. And that's where MCP and those constructs to be able to connect directly to those systems, get that data in real time is so powerful and impactful. Instead of having to train your agent, oh, well, tell the student our data might be off by 4 hours and they should just be okay with that. You would never call into, your cable provider and say, oh, why'd you turn off my cable? Oh, you didn't pay your bill. Well, yes, I did. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. That was outside of our 4-hour update window. That's not the customer service we're used to out in the industry. So it's not what our customers in higher ed are going to be used to either.
I'd like to move to our third story, which is basically a derivation of what we'll be talking about. And it's centered on these, the student data object as we know it, right? And DataKind, which is an organization I actually work for. I don't know if you know this, but I was responsible for launching their global data science practice about 10 years ago. And it's an incredible organization that specializes on the benevolent aspect of data science or AI, so data science for social good, AI for social good type of thing. So they did this work, and by the way, this started when I was working with them, where we started to fit in predictive models to universities, specifically focusing on retention and persistence. And through the work of working with dozens of universities, there's a report that frames the following statement. AI readiness equals data readiness. Nothing controversial, nothing groundbreaking, but there's an aspect of maturity that now we speak about AI maturity. So AI readiness equals data readiness. And there's something that you've been unpacking through this conversation is that data readiness, have not been attained as a sector. Higher education, whether you're awesome R1 school, you listen to this, or you're an incredible community college, or you're basically this highly specialized liberal arts school doing 4-year programs in a beautiful part of the country that is non-urban. Chances are that your data readiness is not at par. So what are we doing? I mean, are we talking about now AI readiness when the precursors have not been deployed? So in a way, we've covered this idea of data readiness. We've spoken about, it's why SIS is, maybe not have the potential that LMS has it because the data objects are more nuanced. CRMs, looking at engagement by connecting the CRM to financial aid and all that kind of stuff. So all that is important. But the fragmentation is true. And I thought that this reporting was interesting because do we even have a chance to make it happen when our data readiness, it's not there? So if you mapped out, I don't know, dozens of these, you've done a ton of data migrations, kind of paint me the real picture here with the lens of how are we doing around data readiness and what does this mean in terms of AI readiness? Do we have a chance? Because if I believe the work that DataKind is suggesting here, AI readiness equals data readiness. And the second one doesn't exist, so why should we pursue the first one? What do you think, Kelly?
And I think how we can take this more bite by bite to not boil the ocean in all one piece is by focusing first on single problems. So I think a lot of these situations fail, data readiness fails because it's just too big of an elephant in the room. So if we can focus on a single use case, I want an agent to be able to do X. Then we map that data. Now we are in a data readiness aspect for that single use case. I think that that's the way to sort of take steps to make AI readiness equal data readiness is making sure that we're taking it piece by piece, slice by slice. We can't eat a pizza without starting with the first slice. So it's important to just take that use case by use case, problem by problem. And I think that's ultimately, too, how you grow buy-in on campus. There is some fear, uncertainty, and doubt associated with these type of projects anyway. So make sure you have a solid use case with data mapped, which is going to get you to that data readiness piece, and then start to layer in new things. And unfortunately, we tend to lose a lot of momentum in those projects. That's why we still don't have a unified student data layer. But, maybe this is our final opportunity to get to that place.
Does FERPA help with that? I find that many of us, when we think about the version of a student data object, right, we tend to go to FERPA for what to do and what not to do, specifically what not to do, I would say. But as as the compliance layer updates itself, because this hasn't happened, everybody. I don't think FERPA has come out and say this is what it means to be FERPA ready in the lens of AI. So as they do this work, what do you think is going to, what's your bet? What's your prediction that is going to do to these problems of a common data model that it's making agents not thrive? I guess that's our premise here. And as such, as institutions, our AI maturity will not be deployed. So what's your prediction here on FERPA?
Yeah. I think that it can go either way. What a on the on the line answer to give. But I think too commonly in higher ed, we use compliance reasons, FERPA, GLBA, throw whatever acronym you want into the alphabet soup that we have here. Too often we use that as we can't do it because of FERPA. I've been told so many times in trying to deploy different projects, we can't do it because of FERPA. If we use it for the compliance lens that it is to help derive that governance and framework, and not as a scapegoat to not move forward, I think that's where all of these compliance things, updating their models, having an understanding of AI can really help. It's just really making sure too that as leaders, we aren't going into a conversation saying, we can't do it because of X. Well, open your, it's a maturity piece, right? We have to make sure that we're open to hearing what the problem is, what the potential solutions are, and then apply compliance as a framework instead of sort of a scapegoat. We can't do it because we have these requirements on us.
Last question on this story. If I'm back to university, what was the name? The Bonilla University of Awesomeness?
University of Awesomeness, yes.
Yes.
I'm waiting for my sweatshirt.
You forgot the Bonilla University of Awesomeness.
Yeah, true.
So my data readiness is shit. It's the worst. What do you say to me? Should I be pursuing an AI angle here, or should I just fix that and then wait for it? Is there a dependency? Can it work in parallel? What do you say to me as a university that I really have gaps and holes on data readiness?
Yeah. And I say use this as your lever then to improve your data readiness. So let's start with a single use case. What is the worst thing affecting your students right now? Is it them calling because they're waiting to see what their admission status is looking like? Is it waiting to see what their financial aid status is? What is the question that's impacting your staff and your students the most? Let's start with that use case, data model it out, fix that data so that we have the appropriate context and construct for that data model. And let's solve that. Let's take this piece by piece because, obviously wanting to be the University of Awesomeness, you have to start from a good data integrity perspective as well.
Well, Kelly, we've had a conversation that is kind of not exciting in the sense of the possibilities, but the constraints. We spoke about the data stack is broken and agents are not thriving because majority of the data they're exposed to is non-existent or their systems are not connected. The compliance layer is complicated. Our data objects are not there. And as such, the orchestration of multiple agents is not existent, right? So an institutions trying to do this may not be set up for success. But there is success happening. In our last story, something that we're starting to see in reporting from from inside higher education and other sources, we start seeing that the deployment of agents do make the difference when done. And we kind of, in a way, we've spoken about how these deployments don't work well, but it's working and it's working in pockets. So the next conversation and the next reporting, it's on what institutions who are winning are doing differently, right? So there's definitely a shift that is happening in institutions where they're shifting their profile. And they did not start by deploying agents per se, right? They maybe started with deploying chatbots and market automation. We can start seeing in the reporting that there's some type of evolution. Obviously, universities who have a unified student profile, they have more data-rich layers from academic engagement, financial aid, behavioral aspects that allow agents to have more jobs. But at its core, what we've seen in this reporting that there's jobs that today can sit on one system and they're doing fantastically. You can have deployments of agents calling students to come and attend an event. You can have constant systems that remind the student to attend meetings. And many applications like that do not need this data layer dependencies of connectivity and exposure to thrive. It's all about the job. So the difference between an institution running coordinated AI infrastructure versus the university that it's having AIs and being successful in a way is a quest for intelligence, right? In a quest for delegating jobs in certain type of jobs. They're going for the outcome. That's kind of what I would say, right? So the difference is not the quality of the models here, or it's not that they have better technology or that all the data is super connected or they're more intelligent. It's completely on, this is the outcome that I want to achieve, and I have the right technology and the data layer to achieve it. So we'll be sharing some of these links with our audience, but pretty much that's kind of what my takeaway of this reporting is on what agentic campuses, successful ones, look like. Are you seeing something different here? What do you see when it comes to the ones that are thriving? Data points, 400 schools in our partnership, but you're so interconnected with everybody in the tech sector for higher education and ed tech. What are some of these signatures of success that makes AI thrive, even with these constraints that we just kind of discussed, Kelly?
Yeah, and it really is, to your point, finding the use cases that make sense. Knowing the strengths of your institution, where you have good data, like that event example that you brought up is so key. Even just with basic automation, right? So not even agentic AI being present. We saw that with one of our partners. Just letting people know about an event, basic communication skills is what is key to making sure that there aren't empty seats in that classroom when that event happens. So understanding the use case, drilling into that use case, and then iterating, understanding it's such a basic project management framework to analyze what happened for what went good, what didn't go good, and how can we iterate from there. And I think those schools that already had that muscle to be able to flex it now with just AI as a tool instead of automation, instead of RPA, instead of all of these things that have come before it, having that muscle of just knowing how to iterate and make things better is really the key thing. And that's where we're seeing success across our partners that I'm fortunate enough to work with every day. That's where we see it across the industry as well. And where people are falling down is where they're just making it too broad and not really accessing their key strengths or analyzing what made something a success or a failure. Having that project management, change management methodology in place and having that muscle is key, and such a non-techie thing, right, for a technologist to say, but it's those important things.
I like what you say. It's very pragmatic and it's very logical. So, you just need to start in a place where you're going to win, right? And then the use case drives that. On the nose type of question. When you smell a problem, like that's a bad place to start versus that's a good place to start. Like usually what do you see either bad places to start or good places to start? I'm just trying to get from you what are maybe good use cases to start if I am like on my first AI project type of thing.
Yeah. And I love the projects where we first applied automation. So, in my consulting, right, I've been implementing old school CRMs for a long time. And my original consulting statement, as I was bringing up those systems, there was FUD with those too, right? So admissions counselors saying, oh, well, I send that email, application comes in, I send the email. And I was like, well, do you see that as your differentiator? Typing out that email, JC, is that really what makes the student want to come to University of Awesomeness or not? And the answer was no, right? So I said, well, let me automate that for you because you don't want me calling students, but I can certainly automate this and take this off of your plate. So starting where we've had success traditionally in things like work study call down lists, right? We've done that for decades. As a work-study student myself, right? I used to call down on all my campus tours before I would give campus tours. So making sure that we're taking these use cases that are well-defined, we've already had success in more traditional manual models, and then applying the technology to them. That's where we see all the success. It's those use cases that come up and they're like, oh, we've always had a problem with this. We've never had success. I don't even know really what the problem is, but people say they don't like it. Well, then how are we going to solve it if we don't even know what the puzzle looks like? So making sure it's well-defined and that we've had success before, that's what gets us the adoption that we need and that we're desperately searching for with AI in higher ed.
Speaking of puzzles, few months ago, you led this presentation on the puzzle of success, right? And it was kind of like four pillars: a unified student profile. We've spoken about that. You also spoke about the importance of real-time events as number two. So trying to go, for those APIs as opposed to batch files. You spoke about a built-in governance. So you need to have also that arm, and the kind of agent-ready data design. So those four were the principles, and I argue that it makes a lot of sense. But I am now a CTO, a CIO, so I sit on top of it, of the institution. Maybe I have the cloud to push this for. Translate this for me when I am doing a bottoms-up approach, right? My institution hasn't grabbed it, and as I'm hearing this conversation, there is so many examples where we see good AI deployments, right? With our technology and others technologies, but it's a bottom-up approach, and there's no data governance. The data unified student profile is non-existent, and real-time events maybe not yet, or maybe some parts of it. We've seen good AI, and it's bottoms up, and then maybe a year later in our prior history, we've seen how these bottom-up approaches moves institutions, right? So, any words of advice as you think of, I'm launching projects, but I'm the director of admissions, so I'm the head of the counseling team, and I have this agent or AI, and it does it, but my institution is still not in these four pillars: unified profiles, real-time events, governance, or agent-ready design. What do you say to them? Just keep on going, or what do you say to them?
Well, and it's so interesting because I know I presented on the AI Ready campus a couple years ago and sort of predicted this, right? That, well, IT, if you don't start making models, making policies around who can access these AI tools, you're going to end up with shadow AI, just like we have shadow IT across these campuses. So this bottom-up approach, and you've seen that in your industry work too, JC, right? Where sometimes the best ideas come from the lowest levels of the organization. And it's important to nurture that, create centers of excellence around making sure that those ideas can come to the forefront, and then nurture that as an incubator. Too many times, right, that we see in higher ed, there's just a hammer down approach that comes down from top down. That's like, well, you're using tools that we didn't actually tell you that you could use, so now we have to kill the whole program. So it's a culture that, as a leader, we need to understand that we have to be able to nurture and incubate these great ideas. So how do we make sure we're providing people with the tools and the flexibility and the freedom and the empowerment to be able to do this the right way? And I think we do that in a really great way here at Element. And I can say in other organizations I've worked with, it hasn't been the same, where they're like, if you see a problem, if you see a tool, give it a try, but at least tell us what's going on so that we can maybe help you out. And so I know I've worked with Doug on your team on, I built out this tool, but error check it for me, because I don't, we have to make sure that we're in this together and I'm not sharing data out that I need to, that would get us into trouble. So I think, being able to incubate those thoughts, and from the students as well. I just shared yesterday, my son's high school is now incorporating AI into the engineering. It's great, and I'm so excited, but it's all starting first with the ethics in AI, how to use it, how to question it. So build that foundation in your team so that they know sort of the rules of engagement, but then help incubate and grow those skills.
Kelly, last question. And again, this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. And awesome that your kid is now perceiving AI in high school, not as don't do it, but more embracing. Many high schools are still in the trenches of it's cheating, you don't do it, as opposed to embrace it. So here's a question that has a scenario that never, ever happens to you. You run into a CIO that and you don't know the CIO. And the CIO is telling you, hey, I work, in a mid-sized university. My budget is limited. Everyone's asking me to do AI. Everyone's telling me, how my data architecture is not ready. Like all the problems that we just discussed. What is the one thing I should do, Kelly? Like, what is the one investment? If you had the magic wand, whatever construct you have for the art of the possible, if I am a CTO, a CIO of an institution, and I'm trying to make impact, what do you recommend to them should be the one thing they should be doing? What is the investment that perhaps could have the most leverage? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think the first thing is, being open with your campus community. We're all hearing about AI. You may have private accounts that we're working with. Let's come with an AI strategy together. grab one of the best ideas from that, right? We all hate the word committee in higher ed. There's too many of them, but bring everybody together, make it a Dropbox, for example, that they can put their ideas in, just to hear from the community what could be a good use case to start with, then invest in that technology. Make sure that your DPAs are in alignment with your FERPA, GLBA, all of the compliance that you need to do. But take care of that. That's where you shine. That's your strength, is making sure compliance is covered. Let them be the idea maker. Let it come from your functional community, and then invest there. And so that's going to make sure that it's a community problem, a campus problem, a university problem, and not just something that IT is trying to solve.
I like this idea. The AI Dropbox. I don't know if it exists on campus, but that's a very the suggestion box. I used to have one of those.
The suggestion box, little low tech.
For the little low tech for high tech. Sometimes it works. Kelly, you were great. Thank you so much. Anything before we go? Anything that comes to mind?
I would just say that, your AI strategy is ultimately your integration strategy.
Ooh.
So that all feeds into each other. Make sure that you're starting with a use case, building context, mapping your strategy so that you don't end up with just some over bloated FAQ page that nobody wants.
Words of wisdom. Kelly, thank you so much. This conversation was awesome, and it's exactly what many AI vendors don't want to have, because it forces the question of whether institutions are ready for the technology or not. So please, as you listen to this conversation, it's really, really foundational that you understand some of the nuance that we're discussing here on how to buy AI, how to introduce AI, or how to create to Kelly's point, how to create recommendation drop boxes for AI. If you're one of the few people who has answered all these and has a design and a strategy solution for them, good for you, but majority of ours haven't. So I want to leave you with this frame and kind of mindset. We talked a lot in this show about what AI and agents can do. Today was slightly different. We spoke about what they need to succeed, to deliver on the promise. They need context. They need a unified data layer. They need an architecture designed for intelligence, not designed for human navigation or disconnected in systems. They need us, higher education, to show up a la 2026, not the way we've been doing it. So for you institutions that you invest in this foundation, now is the time to do it. I like what Kelly said. Use it as a forcing function, because it could accelerate or unblock some of these siloing that you maybe have been trying to solve over the course of time. The demos can work as presented. We will have to put in good work, but don't blame the AI. Fix the context. And this is where the opportunity, we see that our students, our administration, our faculty, everybody in our ecosystem of higher education is wanting, and how AI can come and deploy it. I'm JC Bonilla. This is Higher Intelligence, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Higher Intelligence. This show is part of the Enrollify network, home to the largest collection of podcasts in higher education. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. You can find more podcasts, webinars, videos, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe to get new content sent directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the AI agent platform for higher education. Learn more at element451.com.